So I would like to bring up to the podium Christina Hanawalt from Penn State. She is ready. Here she is.
Okay, so my presentation is titled Spaces of Freedom and Becoming, Supporting New Art Teachers as Creative Agents Within Contemporary Assemblages of Education. Can you hear me okay?
Talk louder.
Talk louder? Or hold on. Okay. The impetus for my doctoral research comes out of my own experience as a new art teacher over 15 years ago. I completed my undergraduate studies at Penn State with professors who, even way back then, had begun to push beyond movements such as discipline-based art education. The experiences I had in my art education courses instilled in me a desire to teach through contemporary artists and visual culture in ways that connected with both students' lives and the issues of contemporary society. And I did dig these up from 1998. Yeah. We learned to think in nonlinear ways, creating webs and hypertexts, which encouraged us to make connections between contemporary and historical artists, artworks, events, culture, philosophies, and more. The art curricula we designed were not about making art objects that followed in line with traditional school art practices. They were about engaging students in art making that had significance to both students and society beyond the walls of the school art classroom. When I began teaching, it didn't take long for me to realize that the ways of thinking about art education I had learned in college did not necessarily translate to what was happening in school spaces. The school art contexts I experienced were still heavily informed by modernist, formalist practices, which were media-driven, emphasizing observational and technical skills, as well as the elements and principles of design. While the school art curriculum was merely a guide I was free to interpret, and I worked with amazing veteran art teachers whom I valued as mentors, I still yearned for other like-minded art teachers who could help me implement the kind of curriculum I believed in. During those first years of teaching, my identity as a new teacher was in a constant state of turmoil, and I was left viewing the tension I felt as personal failure rather than opportunity. Those feelings have stayed with me and are the force that compelled me to design a research study aimed at supporting new art teachers. When I began researching the literature in relation to this area of study, I was guided by these questions and concerns. Mainly, what are the experiences of new art teachers, especially in relation to the pursuit of contemporary theories of art education within school cultures? In particular, how are contemporary theories of art education taught in universities being integrated into school art curricula and pedagogy? How do new art teachers experience the school cultures they transition into? And what are the current forms of support available to new art teachers, and what do they accomplish? I'd like to share a little bit of what I learned in that process. Literature within art education suggests there is concern that new art teachers are ill-prepared to implement postmodern or contemporary forms of curriculum, as modernism still has a strong hold on K-12 art education curriculum. Bain, Newton, Kuster, and Milbrandt conducted a study in 2010 with novice art teachers who had been exposed to progressive ways of thinking about art education in their university methods courses. However, they found that when the novice teachers transitioned to the public school system, they were quickly asked to assimilate into the school culture and maintain the procedures and content that contributes to the status quo. So what is it about the new art teacher experience that leads those prepared in contemporary theories of art education to have difficulty implementing those theories once they are teaching in school spaces? Well, let's see. Yeah. New art teacher experiences are complex. And although those invested in the preparation of pre-service teachers might like to believe that university coursework holds a significant place in the development of teacher identities, there are a whole range of other factors which also affect the philosophies and practices of developing teachers. Not only do new teachers themselves enter the profession with over 15 years of an accidental apprenticeship of teaching, but their colleagues, students, and even family and friends are subsumed by the social constructs of what it means to be a good teacher. For example, pre-service art educators have spent most of their lives in art classrooms influenced by previous movements in art education, like modernism, creative expressionism, discipline-based art education, and they are equally likely to begin as new teachers in schools where contemporary theories of art education are not being practiced. As Ritchie and Wilson note, it is naive to assume that a few university courses are enough to overcome the years pre-service teachers experienced as students, in addition to the, quote, array of contending social and political ideologies calling out to them, end quote. In addition, new teachers who often enter the field in their early 20s are still early in their journey toward what Marcia Baxter-Magolda terms self-authorship, the capacity to internally define one's own beliefs, identity, and relationships. According to Baxter-Magolda, participants in her study rarely solidified the transition from external to internal self-definition before the age of 30. Therefore, the risk of new teachers being defined by external forces is great. Although new teacher induction programs have become prolific in public school systems nationwide, research has yet to clearly confirm either the effectiveness of induction programs on measurable outcomes or just what kind of effective teacher such programs aim to support and retain. One of the goals of new teacher induction programs is to help new teachers smoothly transition into existing school cultures. However, this goal is insufficient when considering the existing culture and practice of teaching in the United States has been criticized for its, quote, irrelevance to the needs of students for participating in a global economy, sustaining social diversity, and expanding democratic ideals, end quote. Sorry, I think I skipped one there. Not only do many new teacher induction programs lack educational vision, which moves beyond the status quo, they also position new teachers as objects within the educational system. Induction of new teachers is tied to an educational system focused on student test scores or other forms of measurement based on predetermined criteria, and empirical research emphasizes this particular role of induction by looking specifically for the ways induction can be proven effective through quantitative student achievement data. This approach is problematic as it perpetuates a discourse about the teacher, that is, the teacher as being the object we look at from above or from the outside. The crucial piece missing from this approach to new teacher induction is the teacher, her, or himself. As if these concerns with induction were not enough, new teacher induction programs are designed with the general teacher in mind and often lack support specific to art teachers. Quoting Maxine Green, "We do not know how many educators see present demands and prescriptions as obstacles to their own development, or how many find it difficult to breathe. There may be thousands who, in the absence of support systems, have elected to be silent. Thousands of others, sometimes without explanation, are leaving the schools." This quote from The Dialectic of Freedom speaks to a climate of education felt by Maxine Green almost 3 decades ago. And yet her words still ring true today. Startling statistics indicate that as many as 50% of new teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. In a review of new teacher induction literature, the authors raise concern that, quote, perhaps induction and mentoring have become the acceptable or taken for granted solution to the problem of early career teacher attrition and retention without sufficient attention to the research base, end quote. If current induction practices, which aim to help new teachers smoothly transition into existing school cultures, are not proving effective in lowering the alarming teacher attrition rates, then perhaps induction has been targeting the wrong problem. Perhaps the problem is not that teachers need help transitioning into school cultures, but that existing school cultures, fraught with increasing standardization, evaluation, and accountability, are themselves the problem. If this is the case, then new art teachers must be understood as situated in these complex school cultures. And if change in school art curricula is a deep concern, new types of support will be needed in order to help beginning teachers affect change. The positioning of new teachers within the structures of contemporary education begins to feel like a sentence of hopelessness. It seems new teachers are subsumed in a system that is too heavy, too dense, and too sedimented to offer the hope for achieving anything other than the status quo. It is as if the structure calls out to new teachers, saying, "Come here, let me polish you up and refine you, so that you too can be one of us." But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if new teachers were given spaces to develop a critical awareness of their location within the system of schooling, spaces in which they could negotiate their identities amidst the conflicts they face in their school contexts, spaces in which new art teachers could find the support necessary to make changes in school art curricula? Such a space might be imagined as a space of freedom. Green describes human freedom as, quote, the capacity to surpass the given and look at things as if they could be otherwise, end quote. Given this definition, it is apparent that the pursuit of freedom is necessary for new art teachers if they teach in contexts in which their identities are compromised and in which change is needed. I soon began to wonder what the university might do to extend support to recent graduates in order to provide such spaces of freedom. The form of support I imagined would encourage new teachers toward critical analysis of their experiences within school cultures in the hopes of helping them pursue contemporary art curriculum pedagogy in school spaces. As I began to imagine what this form of support might look like, I was inspired by the ways Garoian and Gaudelius theorized the narrative possibilities of collage. According to the authors, the relations between the fragments of a collage create juxtapositions and in-between spaces, which provide opportunities for new ways of thinking and new understandings. Each interaction with a collage carries the potential for something new to occur. Eventually, the author's conceptualization of collage narrative as a form of critical pedagogy formed the basis for my implementation of a conceptual process of collage as critical inquiry with new art teachers. As Garoian and Gaudelius suggest, quote, "In the in-between spaces of the fragments of a collage, where knowledge is mutable and undecidable, opportunities exist for creative and political intervention and production, a kind of educational research that exposes, examines, and critiques the academic knowledge of institutionalized schooling," end quote. Using the theory of collage narrative as a guide for critical inquiry, I gathered a group of 6 new art teachers who were in their first or second year of teaching to work with me for the 2014 to 15 school year. The participants were all recent graduates of the art education program at our university and were located in schools throughout Pennsylvania and Maryland. The beginning art teachers not only had individual sessions with me in their teaching contexts, but also came together for workshops in which they created conceptual collages of their experiences. The new art teachers documented their experiences through photographs, written reflections, sketches, and notes, and then brought those documentations to the workshop so that they could place the various fragments of their experiences in relation to each other and workshop texts. Participants shared in dialogue with group members as they interpreted the documentation of their lived experiences and considered what could be learned from the relationships between the fragments and the in-between spaces. I had hoped the juxtapositions of experience, documentation, and workshop readings would prompt the new teachers to begin to realize their positioning within school systems and spaces and would open up opportunities to begin to imagine otherwise. As a culmination of our work together over the year, the group also developed a concept for an installation of artworks that would pull from their documentation, integrating image and text to convey the ups and downs of their first year of teaching. In our last workshop, the teachers found connections between their artworks and displayed the work next to a gallery show installed by undergraduate art education majors. The central research question which guided my study was, what can be learned about the experiences of beginning art teachers, especially in relation to the implementation of contemporary theories of art education within school spaces, when they participate in a form of support which is extended by the university and which uses collage narrative as a guide for critical inquiry? The sub-questions were focused on new art teacher experiences in relation to the pursuit of contemporary theories of art education, the potential to engage new teachers in critical analysis of their experiences, and the potential to encourage new teachers to find spaces of freedom within school cultures. Unfortunately, when the school year came to a close this past spring and I wrapped up my work with the new art teachers, I had a feeling as though the study had been somewhat of a failure. I felt the work we did together, even with my fancy collage theories, was not enough to help new teachers resist the pull of school norms and the status quo. In fact, I wasn't even sure that was something the new teachers wanted. For example, early in the school year, Alyssa proclaimed her passion for contemporary artists. But when she described her teaching practices, the art making fell back into formulaic practices, using step-by-step approaches and relying on the limited scope of so-called master artists as examples. Her concerns with behavior management seemed to trump any moves toward more open art-making practices with her students. A successful class was one in which students all stayed in their seats. At one point, Alyssa enthusiastically told me about a workshop she had done with a contemporary ceramic artist. But although she said her 5th graders would go crazy for the techniques she had learned, she followed up by stating, "I would love to do stuff like this, but there's no way I could do this with them." By the time of our second one-on-one meeting in the spring, Alyssa seemed overwhelmed and frustrated. She even referred to her 5th graders as a lost cause. However, in Alyssa's artist statement for the end-of-year exhibition, she states, "This has been a challenging year, but the best year of my life. I love being an art teacher." The contrast between what I had understood from my work with Alyssa and what she felt about her experience was just one of the many reasons why I wasn't sure what to make of the work I had done with the new teachers. As I set out to analyze my data, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to discover. If I was to analyze my data by looking at the ways the new teachers either did or did not pursue contemporary theories of art education, I would not only be just another entity evaluating them as objects within the educational system, I would fail to account for the ways each of my participants responded to their experiences differently. So I put data analysis on hold and followed my gut. I went back to the authors who had studied me throughout the research, and sure enough there, in the space of difference between what I thought I was going to experience with new art teachers and what I did experience, I realized I too had been so entangled in a view of new teachers as existing within a vertical hierarchical structure that I was nearly incapable of imagining otherwise. My initial plans for this research were based on a concern that new teachers had virtually no mobility in the stratified hierarchy of education. However, my experiences with the research prompted me to change my perspective. Rather than perceiving new art teachers as oppressed within a vertical hierarchy, what if instead we imagine the hierarchy has exploded? Instead of looking for tiny gaps in the hierarchical sediment, new teachers might be reimagined as participating horizontally as creative agents within contemporary assemblages of education, where in-between spaces are charged with potential and where freedom and becoming are made possible even for new art teachers. The concept of becoming, as theorized by Deleuze and Guattari, is situated in a view of the cosmos as a continual flow of changes in which events are unique instants of production. Becoming, therefore, refers to the difference immanent within the formation of events, the very dynamism of change. In order to value spaces of becoming in new art teacher experiences, we must move to a view of new teachers that understands their entanglement within contemporary assemblages of education, assemblages in which flows of change are constant and each moment carries the potential for something new. I came to realize that the teachers in my study could not be defined by either or. Either they did or did not challenge the status quo. Instead, their actions and talk revealed the multiplicity of ways they exist as becoming art teachers within their contextual assemblages. Through my work with these 6 new teachers, some formations within educational assemblages stood out as particularly dense, stratified agglomerations, which maintained a forceful presence within new teacher experiences. Discipline and order was certainly one of those agglomerations. Others included evaluation and surveillance, standardization, and labeling of students and context, to name a few. However, while Alyssa's negotiation of the assemblage of education seemed limited due to the density of behavior management concerns, other teachers whose contexts were perhaps even more challenging responded differently. Lauren, for example, seemed to have almost a view from above. Lauren referred to her county school system as Big Brother and said, teachers, quote, drink the Kool-Aid here, everyone has to do it, end quote. When describing herself as a teacher, she said, I think I'm a little divergent from their ideal cookie-cutter teacher. In many parts of her interviews, Lauren described experimenting with a variety of mediums, materials, and practices. Her teaching was never overwhelmed by behavior management issues or the logistics of being an art on a cart teacher in 3 different elementary schools. In fact, she consistently tried to prove that she would be anything but held back by her circumstances. Then there was Mary Kate, who was in her 2nd year of teaching. During her 1st year, she had been under surveillance by the high school administrators in her rural school because she allowed a male student to work in her classroom during his study hall time. When I visited Mary Kate's school, she showed me the recessed area of the art hallway where her assistant principal used to hide in order to spy on her. In spite of this, in Mary Kate's 2nd year, she did not hold back from risk-taking. She decided to move to a teaching for artistic behavior approach in her classes because she realized her previous approach was not engaging the students. She also decided she was done with grading student artwork, stating, do you want me to make them hate art because they got an F on every project because they can't blend or shade? Instead, she began having the students design project proposals, create their own rubrics, and complete self-evaluations. Although I'm still working on analyzing the interviews and workshops I did with these 6 new art teachers, I firmly believe in both the power of educational assemblages and the potential of new teachers as creative agents within those assemblages. By suggesting new teachers be reimagined as creative agents within assemblages of education, I'm not theorizing away the realities of working in school spaces. Ideally, educational systems would position new teachers, and all teachers for that matter, as creative agents. Unfortunately, that may not currently be the case, but all hope is not lost. What I am suggesting is that as we prepare pre-service teachers in universities and support those teachers during their 1st years of teaching, we prepare them to see themselves as creative agents, ready to take on the challenge of an assemblage which does carry the potential for new ways of being as teachers. We might take Elizabeth Ellsworth's advice to embrace the, quote, eventful and volatile space of difference, end quote. In this case, between the who contemporary assemblages of education think new art teachers are, and the who new teachers have the potential to become. Current induction practices may attempt to close the space of difference, limiting the movements of new teachers in order to manage the outcomes. However, if new teachers were supported and encouraged as creative agents, then perhaps much-needed changes within school spaces could be both imagined and possible. Like the flight of fireflies made visible, as you can see here, through photography, erupting opportunities, possibilities, and new ways of being are always in the making, if only we can find a way to make them visible. That's the end.
You want me to ask first this time?
Okay.
You deal with something that I deal with all the time, and then I was talking to Sydney Walker with the other day. What do you do with new teachers and this push toward the status quo? And I think same thing, like to come back to students who I've worked with before in the field, and you come back and you're like, well, why are you? And they say like, oh, the kids aren't ready for it. They can't possibly do this, and their fault is like, oh my God, what have we done wrong? You know, how have we failed this miserably?
Right.
You know, so I guess in some ways, but in some ways too, there is, like you said, there's the pragmatic demands of survival. And so I guess in some ways, how do we as a field both, how do you attend to the pragmatic needs of survival while you're trying to get people to be transformational teachers? You know, and is it too much to ask? You know, like Lauren, I think it was, like maybe she's awesome, but is that too much to ask of everybody?
Right. Yeah, I don't know totally how to answer that, but yeah, I mean, I have heard other people I've had conversations with say like, it's just almost in a way kind of ridiculous to expect so much of a new teacher given all that they are asked to do, or all that they have to deal with as new teachers. I guess my thought has always been like, but can't we try? Like, right? Like, can't we? Is there something more that we can do? I guess is my thought was, instead of just kind of saying, well, yeah, there's already new teacher induction programs in place, and just kind of letting it be that. I just, like I said, I wonder if there isn't more that can be done, and like I said, with my study, intentionally maybe separate from those school spaces, so that it is a way to kind of have a dialogue between, what's happening in school and then maybe some other ways of thinking. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
I was asking for, I was going to actually say too, this idea that you said that your study, you feel like it feels like a failure in some ways, and too. But I wonder, kind of like based on the idea of process from before, if this is not part of the process of this research.
Yeah, I kind of debated whether or not to say that. Sabri heard me and she was like, don't say that. But it was important, I think, because at that time I really felt kind of that it was a failure because I had hoped a certain result would happen as, after this like year-long thing, and I kind of felt it didn't. So, but I think, hopefully the kind of part after that where I explained how it led me to think about things differently, made it obvious that it was kind of crucial that I think I had that experience and felt that way because it led me to something new and different.
Cool.
I'm curious about well, there's a lot of things, but thank you first off for talking and sharing. And I actually liked hearing you say that you felt like it was a failure, and just felt. To me, it connected you with the space of the teachers that you were dealing with at the same time. And I was curious about, I guess, two things, like from just a pragmatic standpoint. Is this something that the university is committed to doing long term, is like offering this kind of support for like new grads in that environment? And then also, I mean, did they feel like they were failures, or did they question, I'm kind of curious about how they...
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so two things. One, when I kind of said about what could be the potential role of the university, in my case, it was kind of me. Like I just kind of offered myself up as like, what, I'm gonna host this group, and so it was something that maybe potentially could be continued, but for now it was just kind of my personal time. But I do hope that wherever I may end up, that I'd like to keep working in that direction.
Yeah.
And in terms of whether or not the teachers themselves felt any sense of failure, not necessarily in the ways that I thought the study was a failure, because that was part of the reason why I was saying, like with Alyssa, like what I saw as all of this like behavior management, I don't think she had any awareness of just how much it really, if she was to look at our transcripts, together, I mean, it's so abundant in those transcripts, but I don't think she had any sense of that. So that was part of the reason why, for me, it felt like a failure. But I don't think, obviously, she said it was a challenging year, but the best year of her life.
Right.
So I don't think for her it felt that way. I had 6 participants, so I didn't get a chance to talk about all of them. But there were some that had moments that certainly they felt maybe defeated. Like I had one teacher who was working in an urban area in a charter school where she had planned this huge art show, and she made sure every kid had a piece in the art show, and she put so much effort into it and had 2 parents show up, So like moments like that where she came to the workshop in tears, basically because she was just completely defeated, happened. But like I said, it's maybe a different kind of feeling.
Yeah. So how did you, when you brought them together, and I apologize if I missed it, and I was trying to take notes.
It's
okay. How did you frame it for them when they came in? Like, I'm curious about, like, was it framed as a support group, or like, was it?
Right. That's a good question, and it was a tricky space for me because I was kind of like this researcher, but also leading these groups as sort of a mentor, and so I was always kind of conscious to not push them too much in what we were doing. I kind of, I'd have to look back at the agendas. I did kind of make like a framework for each workshop, and I did make it clear that it wasn't really a space where we were going to say, what are you doing, and let me suggest ways for you to do it better. It wasn't really that. It was more just like, let's talk about the documentation you've brought, talk about your experiences, and I had given them a couple of readings, and it was just kind of about making connections between those things. So, like for example, the first workshop, I had some readings from the limited amount of scholarly writing there is about new art teacher experiences. And they were, so they kind of read what's been written about that scenario and then kind of related that to what they were experiencing. So, and then each workshop sort of changed based on what had happened before.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I can talk more later about that.
Yeah, well, I'm curious.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, 2 hands next to each other.
Yeah.
Who else was it?
Well, there's you 2 right next to each other.
Can I just talk like this? Can everybody hear me? Sure, I'll use this thing. Oh, hot mic. Thank you for your talk. And I'm really curious about actually I want to follow up a little bit what Michael was saying in terms of you're suggesting this sort of thinking about the educational assemblage, right? And so we think about assemblage as having component parts. And I thought it was really lovely the way you were talking about these sort of distributed horizontally with spaces of opportunity in between. And I think what Michael's follow-up question about highlighting the component part of the university in that assemblage and how it performs, and as a part of your analysis, how it contributes to the survival of these teachers. And I wonder, were there eruptions of other component parts that make up our field? So for instance, how do professional organizations show up within that assemblage, or do they? And are those parts of how you move this analysis forward?
Yeah, you mean so like state, like PAEA kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually thought about that as like, oh, maybe there's a place, maybe that would be a potential organization to kind of run with something like this because it is, not really associated with the schools, it's not the university. But in terms of how that showed up, I think what that kind of alludes to maybe is where new teachers do find support, right? And I would say none of them that I'm aware of are involved in a state organization. And the support really for them varied. So like for Alyssa, the one who I said had an amazing year, her family was like a huge support system for her. She worked in a school right near where she grew up. Her family lived there. Her parents would volunteer in the school. So she had this really, like I said, kind of an intense support network. But then other, like the one I described, who had done the art show and no one showed up. She was literally on her own. Like there was no other art teacher there, no family there. And then I had someone else who said, who actually had said to me, it's really important that that new teachers find some support somewhere, both in school and outside of school. But I don't know if that answers your question. Like I said, no one really mentioned the state organization, and no other separate support system. There was one fairly, I don't want to say successful. The one who I said was like, the teachers drink the Kool-Aid there, right? She had what was called like I forgot what it was called, a consulting teacher maybe. So someone who had stepped out of their classroom duties for say 2 or 3 years and served just specifically as like a supervisor or mentor for new art teachers. And so it was kind of nice in the sense that this teacher felt like at any time she could email this person and say, I'm having this issue in my class, can you come observe? But at the same time, she would kind of contextualize that by saying, but she's also the person who decides if I can keep working here. She's the person who evaluates me, right? So there's kind of always this, but, thing. So is that answering your question? Yeah.
Get over here. Okay, so a lot of my research deals with music education, especially who will educate the educators. And I read a case study in which they worked with members of the community and students and in-career professionals. And a lot of the overall conclusion was that there's no way that we can design a 4-year program that comprehensively prepares us into the workforce, ready to go immediately. And when you said that, well, can't we try? I thought about that case study, I went, no. It's just that, like, no matter what you do, all the nuances of being a teacher kind of elude just a 4-year model of getting a bachelor's in music ed or art ed. That being said, when you said I was a failure, when you said I was a failure, I was really intrigued because it's definitely the kind of stuff that I found to be most successful, like these support groups and while you're first starting, the level of support for that. That was my main comment, that like this stuff would seem to work from the music educator's perspective.
Yeah, and was there a specific kind of support that you've had access to that was successful?
No.
So you think it would work, or
yes,
oh, yeah.
Yes, that was their main conclusion,
Yeah,
that
okay.
like the 4 years wasn't enough, and that you'd have
right.
to have something in the.
After, okay. Yeah, and there's different models. I think in like California, there's I think a required 5th year. Is anybody from California? Right, where you do your 4 years of classes, and then there's kind of like a required 5th year where you're in the school, but you're still connected with the university and have a supervisor and that kind of thing. So there are some that aren't just 4-year models, sorry. And in terms of, like thinking like, well, why wouldn't this thing work with the support? I don't think it's a lost cause. Like I said, I think of it like if I was teaching a class for the first time and it didn't go quite right. I think there was things now that I know that I would maybe do differently. And I also think context matters in the sense of of where we're located at our university. It's pretty much, there's nothing else around. So it was hard in terms of just logistics of for everybody to come back and meet. For example, at our university, everybody drove 4 hours to get there, right? So it wasn't necessarily the most convenient either. So I do think that convenience, would be something I would consider of how to make it more convenient for them. I did go to see them at their places too, but, so it wasn't a real easy, and I think even maybe meeting more often, like I said, there's other things I would consider doing differently. Yeah. So many questions. Yeah.
I'm pointing everywhere else. And really, an excellent study is something we need to do, and we need to think more about that first year and what we can do as educators and universities and such. What I'd like to explore with you or ask further, you talked about the process itself over the year, and as you looked back, there was a sense of a transformation in your own understanding of what happened. And I have 2 parts to this question. Is one, do you think that the process that you used had any, or what was the impact, whether it's transformative or what? Did that collage narrative have any what was the impact on the students? And also then in relationship to whatever you say from that is, in thinking back, what might you have done differently in that 1-year process with the teachers?
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot of really what I am still thinking about of, just because I kind of knew what people were going to say, well, what would you do then if you're kind of presenting this idea. So the collage, in terms of the collage, what I kind of viewed as this collage process, I don't know for sure yet. Actually, I mean, I have all these videos of the workshops that I just haven't had a chance to really analyze yet, to go back and see what happened. I've been looking at the interviews that I did, or the one-on-one meetings. So I'm hoping that when I get to the workshop videos, I'll see a little bit more of just what was taking place, because that really was where we were using that concept of like bringing their documentation and talking about it in relation to each other. But at this point, I don't think I can speak to that yet. And in terms of, again, just like what I might do differently in that, I feel like a couple of things. One was that I feel like it should be, I wish I could have offered something more reciprocal, like something for the teachers in terms of, like maybe they would have, could have got graduate credit or Act 48 hours or, something like that, where they would have had a little bit more reason to commit to the process, if that makes sense. Like, other than just me saying, like, let's do this and it'll, I think it'll be worthwhile. Because for example, like having them kind of bring documentation, it kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of like how much they actually did and what they brought with them, and you know what I mean? So some people did a lot, some people did not so much, and so just kind of like making use of whatever they actually did do. And also, again, saying like they're volunteering their time for me. So I've kind of felt this like, how much can I really ask them to do kind of thing. So there's that, and then also just maybe getting a little bit more of, kind of like what did they need in that process during the year. So I don't know. There's still a lot to think about. So.
How does this work? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I noticed right away was the teacher that you're talking about that had the view from above. Mm-hmm. And I teach elementary education majors right now here at Ohio State. And I often wonder how much to share with them about my experiences in schools and what kind of, realistic expectations should we be setting for them before they're on schools. I wonder if she had maybe somebody who was a little bit more transparent with her before mm-hmm. teaching, and whether or not that should be something that we consider in teacher education programs. If you had asked them about that at all.
That's a good question. With that particular teacher, I don't know if she had, maybe had that kind of experience that you're talking about. I do think some of it comes down to almost like just their personality in a way. Like, you know what I mean? If I was to say who the student was, I think people would be like, oh, of course she was that way. Because I think she was that way as a student also. But, and I also think some of it maybe comes back to, I mentioned early in the presentation about the idea of self-authorship, and that idea of like, when is it that we get to a point where we're not relying completely on external, sources that tell us what we should be doing. And I do think that just in terms of where the new teachers were in that, on that spectrum, it mattered. And some of them were, maybe had come back for their master's, so they were new teachers, but they already had 2 degrees. So, and I felt like I could see, that difference in perspective with them. And also, one teacher said, and I think it was the one that had the master's degree, she said something that I thought was really interesting, where she said something like, I wonder how many of us who are going into teaching really think it's going to be ideal at this point. Like she basically said, like, we know it's not going to be a piece of cake. We know it's not going to be ideal. And so, it made me think like, oh, is that just something, that I was kind of, a perspective I was putting on that scenario? I don't know. So that may be, they may be more aware than we give them credit for, in other words. I don't know. Yeah.
I wonder, because speaking with some of my students, I feel like some of them are going to be surprised, and then some of them seem really aware of, where it is that they're going and what the potential could be for what kind of position they're going to be in. They might be in a school by themselves, or they might be in a school that has a great support system already in place for them. And so I wonder how much to share. I was wondering if that was something that you had thought about, but thank you.
Yeah.
One more question.
Well, everybody took my questions, but I do, I do want to follow up on the, what you said just a couple seconds ago about the first year experience, and we don't quite know what they do need, right, to make change. And if we all think about our first year of teaching, I'm thinking about mine, in P12 teaching, and I just wanted to go home at 7 o'clock every night and go to sleep. So if we think about teaching as a developmental kind of project, and in the first year, a lot of teachers aren't going to be making a lot of change, then you've got a great opportunity for a longitudinal study to find out when it is that they are ready. And at that point, what do we need to do as teacher educators to think way beyond the first year and into year 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10? And how do we get people ready for that moment when we're teaching them now?
Yeah,
So
I think that's a great, I mean, I would have loved to kind of keep up with this, like you said, because I do think, just based on the contact I have with these teachers, like, I do see some things happening even in the second year now, just based on what they're posting on Facebook and stuff like that, that I'm like, oh, like, I do think there's some little things happening now in the second year. So I think you're right. I think a longitudinal study would be really valuable in that way. Yeah.
So, thank you.